So Sam, you came up with the idea of doing a nutrition quickfire. So I want to get straight in with a question. Let's try and get through as many as we can in the next 45 minutes and get some real actionable advice for coaches to actually improve the nutrition. Because what really sparked this for me was when you put up a post saying coaches don't know enough about physiology, despite the fact they always influence it. So let's do a crash course. So first question, how much should coaches concern themselves with metabolic downregulation?
I think it's important depending on the client avatar that you're working with. So let's say you historically have attracted a client who is that chronic dieter, person who tends to do a lot of maybe group exercise classes, high intensity training, high intensity intervals, lots of cardio. I would certainly want to better understand metabolic adaptation so that I could really have a better gauge of my client's caloric expenditure, because when we're experiencing metabolic adaptation, where this is going to show up in client transformation, should have a lower than predicted TDEE, or total daily energy expenditure. So for that type of client, if you're a coach who's not familiar with metabolic adaptation and the physiological consequences of it, you may actually overestimate their energy expenditure, which is going to lead to some frustration in terms of client results, and you'll end up having to manipulate the nutrition down the road.
And do you think a lot of that more is that coaches need to understand the signs rather than that everyone is a little bit fragile now and needs to be more concerned with it? Like, where is this sort of line between people are becoming unhealthier or more overweight or more inflamed? There's more yo-yo dieters because of social media and all these other pressures. And how much of it is like, because this awareness has grown, and to some extent in a good sense, that people are now very, very scared to push their clients? Is it more that coaches need to understand this is what thyroid does, so I understand if I'm pushing them and I see something really go wrong, I know it before it becomes a big problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say it's a mix of both. I think there's an enhanced sensitivity to these topics. And in some ways, that's a good thing because it certainly exists. We didn't have the same style of workouts. We didn't have the same, exact style of diets going on right now that are popularized. Now, social media creates kind of this bubble for everything and almost this echo chamber of ideas, but then people are arguing. So clients are, 1 week they think they need to be vegan, and then they think they need to be keto or carnivore, but they think they have to restrict their calories, or they're ordering, Optavia meals, more popular here in the States. But the idea is basically just very calorically restricted eating. But the idea of some type of diet or restrictive intervention, that's been around since Weight Watchers. It's been around since Slim Fast. This was going on in the 80s. I mean, Lulu Hunt Peters was writing about this in the beginning, or like early 1900s. So we're not really, this concept of dieting and restriction is not necessarily new. And I do talk about it a little bit in Metabolism Made Simple. But I think because of social media, we're sensitive to certain topics like metabolic adaptation, where a coach can be incredibly more powerful and impactful is simply understanding when to use that science, when to push a client. It's not that we never want to push. I'm a firm believer in intensity and consistency, but for the wrong person in the wrong dose at the wrong time, it can be misapplied. So for coaches, it's becoming more and more important, not only to understand the tools that you have at your disposal, but when do I use each tool? So using the right thing at the right time for the right person. So we're not just going to put everybody through a reverse diet. I don't agree with that. We're also not going to put everybody into a deficit right away. I also don't agree with that. Some people may need a maintenance phase. Other people may need to focus on their digestive health. So more people are certainly experiencing health complications as a result of whether it's the Western diet style, whether it's a result of poor sleep, poor lifestyle, lack of movement. So there's a myriad of factors that contribute to the metabolic status quo. But I also think coaches need to understand the client that's in front of them. And this is why asking the right questions is so important. It's why I'm a believer in don't just run a calorie calculation, ask for a 7-day food log. You need to look at the food journal. You need to understand what would it be like to be with this person for 24 hours as a fly on the wall in their life. And then you can better understand how to really serve them and provide the best program possible. Far too often, coaches they get very emotionally attached to the style of program that they prefer, that has worked for them in their transformation. And then they make a false assumption that that needs to be used with every client. And I don't necessarily agree with that.
I think it's the nuance that's been lost. I think when we look at this is training and nutrition, right? We see people on the extremes. In exercise mechanics, I call them muscle mechanics and movement mechanics, right? Muscle mechanics are people that put more bands on a hack squat than a set swing. And movement mechanics, it's all rib cage and pelvis and breathing. And like the middle ground is there. And I think with nutrition, you see coaches fall into the two camps of they're grinding their clients into the dust and making this problem worse. And this is why we've seen that pendulum swing one way. But on the flip side, I've seen clients that come in and they go, their food diet says 1,200 calories. So it must be thyroid and I need to reverse diet them. I'm like, yeah, but they might not be telling you about the cookies on the weekend. And they might not be telling you about the week. And they might not know MyFitnessPal. And they might be adding loads of oil and stuff. It's like, when you with a client, like, how do you start to work out what is a real 7-day food log and what is a 7-day food log that's trying to impress you, or mistakes, or things they're hidden, they don't know about, that sort of stuff?
I think it begins with setting expectations in the intake process and onboarding, and also effective communication. And I try to be very honest that I tell them that if you've done something that you think I would actually want to change, I'm like, don't change it. Literally do exactly what you're doing. And there's going to be no judgment in the review of this process, but it's the way that I can effectively guide you. I tell them that it would take longer if you're trying to cover things up, if you're trying to make it look better, if you're trying to make it seem that you're further along than you are with your health and fitness. I would rather see, I tell them, I'm like, if you ate 7 cupcakes, I'd rather know that you ate 7 cupcakes than try to pretend that it didn't happen. Because I tell them it's good news. If you actually have those deviations, as much as it may be frustrating in the short term, as a coach, that means I have the ability to pull down calories effectively because you've actually been eating above maintenance. Now, if you haven't been doing that, that's actually a more serious concern, because you have been kind of that type A overachiever, burn the candle at both ends, hyper restrictive, very much in a season of dieting and restriction for a long period of time. And this is why I try to educate on the difference between a deliberate attempt at a caloric deficit in the short term versus kind of this perpetual attempt at fat loss for your entire life, right? We can't really, it doesn't really work that way. The longer that you try to do it, it begins to impact us both from physiological and psychological avenues. So we really need to be able to go intensely with it for a period of time. And then depending on the person and their biofeedback and their response with training, we may take a little bit of a break. Maybe we go through a maintenance phase. It's not going to be the same for every single person, but I encourage honesty. And I always say, it's better to have that little buffer of calories if you feel you are overeating, because I can then do something with that. If you're truly this restrictive, if you're truly only eating this amount of food, that's a completely different approach. So I try to educate on how it will inform my decision-making, and really tell them, if I were a new coach, if I could go back in time, over a decade ago, I would just really try to emphasize with clients, like, there's no wrong answer. There's literally no wrong answer. The most important thing is from day one, we have really good communication with one another. You tell me exactly what you're doing. And if for one day you mess up, I'm like, my job is to help you so that doesn't happen. So we have a good game plan. Yes, I'm here to push you. Yes, I'm here to hold you accountable. But at the same time, I can only do that if I know we can't be working with this distorted version of reality that's not the truth. And I'm always a big believer that as a coach, our ability to solve those problems and give the person a return on their investment is part of why they're working with us. So I begin with that communication, and I just try to set the expectation first and foremost of, hey, what are you expecting from me as a coach? But also, here's kind of what I'm expecting of you as a client. And this is what enables me to help you to the best of my ability. And if I can't do that, you're going to be very frustrated in the long run. So if you did go out on the weekend and have wine with your girlfriends, or you have been cooking with a pound of butter, please just tell me. There's literally, that means we have so much that we can do in the meantime. And you actually probably have a decent intake to begin with, because you actually have this extra, bit of intake coming in. So that's kind of how I approach it. And certainly there are situations where I wish I would have done more of that in the past, but it's kind of a message I try to share now.
I clearly have too much intake going on, as my chair is moving downwards as I'm asking these questions. But
it happened to me yesterday. I was actually chatting. I was on a Zoom meeting, and all of a sudden my chair just dropped out. I was like, oh, well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there, but it's you're right. It's a much easier situation to go, well, you're eating too many calories than the minefield of going, right, something's going wrong under the hood, and then we need to go and investigate it. And I always say to my students, like, our job as coaches is to, if this was a Harry Potter story, my job is to be Dumbledore, and my client is Harry. Like, it's their journey. And rather than trying to find this quote unquote optimal meal plan of what we think is best for them, it's like, well, okay, you're going out with wine with your girlfriends. Well, could we make this work in the plan? Is it the quote unquote healthiest plan? Maybe not. But until it's a problem, we may find something that you can stick to, that you can enjoy. And like, as long as it's still going towards your goals and you can set those expectations, I think like there's no need to make this harder than it needs to be. So
yeah, and it's I think dose is very important. We lose sight of it's just like with training, right? So the first thing you learn when you become a PT is like frequency, intensity, and volume. With nutrition, lifestyle, so many other areas of life, what's going to matter is, now if you're binge drinking, very, very different than you had half a glass of wine, sipping it, by the fireplace in the winter with some of your friends. Completely different conversation. So I think we need to parse out kind of that frequency, intensity, volume, a little bit on self-discipline, self-control, emotional regulation, understanding why we're doing certain things. I think it's very different to have a small piece of, let's say you're at your kid's fourth birthday party or fifth birthday party, and you're with your daughter and she wants to like enjoy this experience with you. A planned deviation that's very intentional and meaningful and actually has some sort of community component to it. I mean, we even see this in research related to longevity, how important community and relationships are. That's totally different than going to the store by yourself, coming home, or like going through your closet on, and just snacking on all these, empty calories. I think it's just learning to plan and prepare for life and understanding that the better that you're able to navigate those situations while also staying in alignment with the person you want to be and the goals that you have, that's what's going to make you successful in the long run. Now, can you eat those foods every single day? And is it the most optimal for your health? No, there's something to be said for eating single ingredient whole foods, micronutrient density, getting adequate calories for the amount that you move. But I think the broader conversation here is being able to discern when it's appropriate to do that type of thing, and also not lying to yourself about why you're doing it. So I think there's a level of self-awareness and honesty, and where coaches can be very helpful is serving as that mirror and helping you navigate both that conversation with yourself and auditing those behaviors. So if I may just shed light on something or bring attention to it. I love that you use the Dumbledore and Harry Potter analogy. It's not our job to fight every battle in their life. It's not our job to basically win the game for them or to rig it in some form or fashion. But I think some level of supervision and also teaching, right? So that education is huge. I'm obviously a big proponent of that. So I definitely agree. Yes, we can incorporate parts of it. I do still think to lean on, so maybe folks who are less experienced on the nutrition side, one of the first things you learn related to training is we're really modulating these variables of training frequency, intensity, and volume. In your life, in your nutrition, there's something to be said for how frequently do you deviate? What is the intensity of that deviation? How many calories are you accumulating during that deviation, right? Those are all kind of worthwhile metrics and conversation points. And it all brings us back to, whether we're tracking a particular way or following a particular diet style, I really think it still brings us back to that conversation of self-awareness, being able to audit the decisions we made. Are we acting in alignment with the person that we're trying to become, who has the body that we want or the life that we want? And really, are we keeping a promise to ourselves? And what coaches are able to do is when they meet someone in their journey, like using Dumbledore, Harry Potter example, if I know that someone has a goal or a dream outcome and I can reverse engineer the solution to the problem they're currently facing to help them achieve their goal or achieve their dream, really what we're doing is, by holding them accountable and giving them the appropriate strategy, I am paving the way for that person to keep promises to themselves and become that person that they want to be. Regardless of whether you believe in, German volume training, or you think that everybody needs to go low carb, or whatever you subscribe to, when we cut through all of the arguments and the bullshit in the fitness space, that's really what you're doing. And the better you can do that, and the more tools you have to do that, the better I think you can be and more effective you can be as a coach.
I completely agree with that. It's a level of mindfulness, and I apologize if it's not this guy, but I think it's Dr. Judd who wrote that book on quitting smoking. It's now moved towards nutrition, and it's an element of being mindful. And like a lot of this, like if you the great comparison is like someone that's broke. I spent a lot of my life being very, very broke, and it was never because I bought too many Rolexes or I went to Ibiza too much or had too many holidays. It was often I went to Deliveroo too much. I spent on rubbish stuff. I got too many Coke Zeros, right? In the same way with people's health, it's that mindlessness of eating. And I think a lot of diets do is to draw attention to, here's the calories that don't serve me. Here's the stuff I eat mindlessly and feel bad about it, as opposed to the cake on the 4th birthday party, which is absolutely worth it. Like rather than the three.
Yeah, if you're carving out a lifetime memory, you look back. So I'm what some people would consider like a relatively, healthy person. I've achieved the body composition that I wanted and my goals, but there are certain experiences where I actually look back now and I'm like, dude, you're a little uptight about this. Actually, in hindsight, you don't, I don't regret the aggressive pursuit of my goals, but I do sometimes wish that there was a level of presence with certain family moments. I have much older parents now. So at my high school graduation, I was already very interested in fitness. My college graduation, I had already competed in bodybuilding between my sophomore and junior year of college. So I was already engaging in a level of restriction that to most people is not normal at all. And it also, knowing now, okay, I'm now in my mid 30s, looking back on that, okay, those are experiences that they're only once in a lifetime experiences. Yeah. I think people use the YOLO thing far too, the you only live once. It's not trending as much as it was before, but I think our generation has used that as an excuse to be out of integrity with, those promises that we're talking about in terms of, keeping those promises to themselves. So I think that's one issue. But looking back for me, I totally agree with you about the birthday. For me, it was a graduation. I'm like, it probably wouldn't have been the end of the world. You could have ordered like steak and a potato at a restaurant. You didn't need to go home and like meal prep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there are situations now where I have a different viewpoint because I've been that person that was so relentless, but I also understand that pursuit helped make me the person I am and the coach that I am and the sensitivity that I have for clients in their situation. As far as the analogy to finance, I'm glad you brought that up, but I'd also point out, you mentioned things like little things, or you said rubbish or Coke Zero. It may have not actually been as much a spending problem as an earning problem. And then what you were spending, like as far as alignment to your earnings. So I think that's almost like the person who's having a hard time losing weight, but they're not resistance training. And so they think they can only eat like 1,100 calories. I'm like, well, is it actually solely a dietary problem? Or is it because you haven't developed the muscle mass? You haven't necessarily moved enough. Like we're missing some of these lifestyle factors. And so we're living in this world of rigidity and basically having to just, it's less versus, being able to kind of expand their intake there. Or for you from a budget perspective or your finances, earning more, it's like in hindsight, hopefully you are able to enjoy, if Coke Zero is your thing, that should not be a major financial stressor for you. There you go. As he's holding up on the screen right now, if you're listening to the audio version, but that's something again, where I think there's a level of perspective. You can probably learn from that experience, but also understand, okay, was it related to these patterns or was there a broader theme in my life that was kind of contributing to the situation that I was in? So I think you could look at it either way.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I totally agree with that comparison there as well, because it's, you see people who, certainly when I was training clients in Hong Kong, a lot of clients said, I was fine losing weight when I was 20 and it's now age. Age is the reason why my metabolism has slowed down. And I'm like, you're 35. You're not 85. And it's that exact same thing. What happened when they were 18, 19, 20? They were playing tons of sport. They were running around. They were doing a bunch of stuff. They were probably like doing a few extracurriculars at 4 a.m. and dancing around on a dance floor, burning a bunch of calories. And now they've got more and more office work and more sedentary, and it creeps up on them. I know for me, like even me in the last 6 months, right? It was like I was PTing, but I started doing more of office PTing. I started mentoring, and then I've gone fully online. I'm like, oh, my lifestyle is different now. And
yeah, when you're not loading and unloading plates for your clients, you know, it's like, you notice you have a client, maybe you're working with people, maybe they deadlift anywhere from 135, 225, 315. You're helping them with their plates. You're moving around the gym.
Yeah.
I look back at what I was able to eat because of working on the gym floor, and also, you know, driving from location to location. I also had a side hustle on top of that where I wouldn't say incredibly active, but I got a lot of steps in because of walking between offices and things. Then you work at home and it's 6, 7 PM and you're like, oh my God, I have 4,000 steps today. This, you know, this is not good. And I managed to have 40 minutes for a training session. So I do think seasons of life is an important conversation, but I think what you're getting at there in terms of age and looking at lifestyle and behaviors is a lot of times people have that conversation around metabolism or hormones, and they think that because they're aging, that's the reason that they are struggling with their weight or body composition. But more often than not, when we look underneath the hood of their life, it could be maybe you were taking your children to soccer practice every day, or you coached basketball, you were going to school, you were maybe in a season of life where you were active and doing more things, or going to work out with your friends. And then when that changes, let's say your kids graduate and go off to college, or I think you guys say would go off to university. So go off to college or university, and now you're at home. Maybe you're retired, you're not driving to an office or walking or doing these things. And so now you've lost that walk to the parking lot. You lost that trip to bring your kids into school. You didn't walk to the school bus. You know, all of a sudden now it's like we're reducing 5,000 steps per day, and maybe you're less engaged in other ways. You're not playing with your kids, you're doing certain things, and then you wonder why you're accumulating weight. And I do think some of it is that total daily energy expenditure conversation. I would also say that our current lifestyle, modern technology, the nature of our workforce, the quality of our foods, micronutrient status, and things like sleep are contributing to a suboptimal state from an endocrine perspective. Like, our hormones are definitely not doing us a ton of favors to make it way easier. I do think people make it harder by not doing the right things from a lifestyle and nutrition perspective. And then that's really where it starts to bite you. Or let's say you have lower testosterone or slightly lower thyroid. It may not be that it leads to this immediate accumulation of weight, but what happens is the effort doesn't feel quite as good or rewarding or as easy. So like going for that walk now feels kind of like a chore. Going to the gym and having a great training session and exerting appropriate intensity is now hard. Like, it is not this effortless thing. Whereas when you're in a state of more optimal hormonal health, let's say using testosterone as an example, probably going to go in the gym and feel pretty good and probably be able to push your training sessions. Now, if you're dealing with a combination of things related to stress, HPA axis, nervous system fatigue, low testosterone, you're probably going to, for lack of a better term, drag ass through that training session, partially due to the hormonal state. Then when we factor in things like thyroid for women, it's not so much just the fat burning side of the equation. It's also slowed motility, constipation, hair, skin, and nails. Now all of a sudden I'm not excreting hormones the way I was. So thyroid and motility and having healthy gastrointestinal function is helping to excrete hormones like estrogen from the body and our stool. So when that whole process begins to be suboptimal, there's downstream consequences. But what I'm trying to say here is it's not just the shift in age. It's not just a slight change in hormones. It's our overall lifestyle. And then the fact that when we experience that suboptimal state, when we don't correct for it, it's usually because it impacts our behavior on a deeper level and the decisions that we make, because our biofeedback and our quality of life is not where it once was. So if you feel lethargic, if you have chronic fatigue, you have low energy, it's not as easy to have that 5-day training split that you used to follow, you know, and to build muscle and keep the body fat off. So I think the important thing is we need to tie the biochemistry to the behaviors, and behaviors to the biochemistry. So getting adequate sleep is going to support hormones and biochemistry, endocrinology, physiology, all that good stuff. And then vice versa, having optimized hormonal health probably makes it feel a little bit better when you go to the gym and you're training and you're able to get, you know, that RPE or that RIR is actually a true, you know, 1 rep in reserve. It's not like I felt like shit today, so I stopped the set, right? That's the stuff that I think we lack that conversation, or we lack the depth of conversation when talking about things like that. So I try to bring a little bit more exposure to here's how this shows up in your real life. Because that's literally, whether it's a conversation around aging, or if even you're in your 20s and 30s, and let's say it's a female coming off of hormonal birth control, has lower testosterone, a male who's been under eating and did not reverse diet for a long period of time and has lower testosterone. It's being able to be aware of how that's going to show up in their behaviors. And then there's downstream consequences in terms of physique. And it's also impacting us because hormones are quite literally chemical messengers. So imagine you send a DM on Instagram. Okay, that's like one hormone. WhatsApp, that's another hormone. If you have an iPhone or iMessage, that's kind of another hormone. We all have these chemical signals that are being sent throughout our body that help to prompt this subsequent activity or things that are supposed to be happening from a physiological perspective. And when they are not optimized and that signaling is skewed, there's an unfavorable result. And so being able to understand that quote that you kicked off the podcast with, I was just saying that every PT, every nutrition coach, every dietitian, even arguably medical professionals, they impact physiology on a deeper level through the stimulus that they provide. So if you're a strength and conditioning coach, the stimulus of the training has a physiological consequence, because what does our body do when you provide training? Ideally, we adapt to the stimulus. And that is how we go about building muscle tissue or getting stronger, faster, et cetera. And so what people may not understand, they understand the periodization, the programming, et cetera. But if they don't grasp what's happening in terms of our endocrine system, our gastrointestinal tract as a result of intense training, looking at, okay, when I am in a calorie deficit, you mentioned metabolic adaptation earlier. That's a perfect example. We don't understand that. We're toggling and manipulating and tweaking these things at a surface level, not realizing the downstream consequence for the client. So that's why I originally created that post, is just to encourage people to realize it's not just, I made this change and this is all that's going to happen. It's, you change one thing and there's basically going to be a series of events that are as a result of you making that one decision. And you just need to be aware of what might happen down the road in that conversation. So that's where that came from. Also just tying in the aging related conversation. A lot of people use age as a scapegoat. I would really encourage you to look at, have my kids left the house? Did I change my nutrition? Have I been doing different exercise routine because I got bored of what I was doing before? Have that conversation first. Then if you need to, get some testing done to assess where you're at, look at your lifestyle and behaviors, and then see how that suboptimal hormonal profile might be impacting you and your goals and the things you need to be doing, because it will make it harder, right? There's no denying that it may make it harder to do. It just doesn't mean it's impossible. And we want to be careful not to have a fixed mindset around the fact that, oh, my hormones aren't what they were when I was 25, therefore I cannot achieve my goal. That would be a very dangerous thought pattern. So we want to break that, and then ideally maintain a perspective that if I do change these behaviors and do the right things, I can actually make progress.
It's a multifactorial thing as well, right? Like, what do people assume is normal when we age? And it's, if you look back, some of these things are lifestyle. It's like, we got a busy job, so we stopped moving as much. But we also got very, very stressed, which started to stress out the adrenals, which had an impact on thyroid. And then we became metabolically less flexible. And then we stopped weight training. And then we started losing muscle mass. And then these things, sort of this momentum of this snowballs spiraling down the hill. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, that at least an understanding of this. Like, it goes both ways, right? It's an understanding of this, so you know the impact you're having, so you don't cause a problem from the metabolic downregulation side of things, but also from the coaches that go, it must be thyroid, when it could be sneaky hidden calories. It's like, well, you mentioned earlier,
it's probably both, just in a different person. If you work with, let's say you work with 40 clients, you probably have, out of the 40, you probably have 10 where that issue maybe hasn't come up yet. You probably have 10 where maybe there's some inaccuracy of tracking. You might have 10 or 15 where, depending on their past exercise history, diet history, this is actually an issue that's affecting them and you need to be aware of it. And then you have 5 where, maybe depending on the coach that they worked with previously, you may need to go into more of a health phase and optimize what they're doing before you push them with very intense training. Maybe it's kind of like training them how to train and I call this almost like nutritional re-education. I see this a lot with perimenopausal female clients who grew up during, like, I mentioned some fast and Weight Watchers earlier on, but pick any diet style of your choosing. Really, the past several decades and even prior to that, just the conversation for women around nutritional intake, restrictions, South Beach diet, all these different things, and that's like really dating me right now, but, or Atkins, there's just different versions of restrictions. So educating why we need to eat and fuel a certain way for a result, getting some sort of baseline foundations in place, because they've never actually followed a well-designed, intentional, evidence-based program. It's always been the next gimmick, the next fad. And so we have to reestablish a baseline, but part of it may mean you need to help get them healthy first. And then that healthier body may better respond to the stimulus of training and nutrition over the long haul. So I am very set, as someone who, I had a pretty significant head injury when I was younger. I've had endocrine issues myself. It does make it harder to get stronger. It does make it harder to build muscle. It does make it harder to maintain a lower body fat. I would never tell someone that it doesn't. However, sometimes these issues or sometimes these experiences are, we sort of point the finger, or we place blame, or there's kind of a scapegoat. And we do also, there's a fine line, right? So I think coaches need to be very aware of the science, but also understand that really what this means to learn adaptive physiology is to understand that there's a level of personal responsibility for my past choices. Whether you were a chronic dieter or you chronically overate a surplus of calories, completely two different client avatars, completely different physiology. One is very insulin resistant. One probably has a ton of adipose tissue, completely, dysfunctional from metabolic. You mentioned metabolic flexibility earlier. They probably struggle to regulate their blood glucose. They get hungry, even if they've just eaten. They don't have great satiety. Maybe their sleep is completely, they might even have sleep apnea because they're overweight. That is an avatar over here. You have the person who's a chronic dieter. The one thing that exists in common between those two people is there is a level of personal responsibility for my past choices that contributed to the current metabolic status quo I'm experiencing. So if you were the one who you brought your calories down that low and were incredibly restricted for a period of time, that was part of the problem, right? So we have to first own that. And it's scary, but the good news is it means that you can be a part of your own healing. You can be a part of you are your solution to the problem that's been created. For the person who's overweight, some folks may have a hereditary predisposition towards certain metabolic conditions, cardiovascular disease, hyperlipidemia, higher blood pressure, etc. However, even with that baseline sort of that we're working from, there's still something to be said about environment, epigenetic expression, our choices, our habits, our behaviors. You also played a role in where you are currently. That's like, it's one of the hardest things you will ever do in your life, is to take personal responsibility for where you are and your exact circumstances. But it's also the moment that you become more powerful than you've ever been in your entire life, because you realize that you are now also, you have the ability to make it better. You have the ability to navigate out of where you are. And that's really cool. It's scary to have that realization, but it means I got here. I can also play a role in fixing it. And with the help of a professional who knows what they're doing, I've got this, right? Because if you can get yourself into it, you can also get yourself out of it too, so I try to educate from the perspective of, yes, it is harder. Yes, there are things that may be working that feel like you're swimming upstream right now. And a good coach will help make that less shitty, right? That's the job of a good coach. But also when you have that moment that you realize that the resistance you're facing is largely a byproduct of past choices that you've made, which really are just a compound effect working against you, you now have the ability to stop that, and you start accumulating interest in the right direction, compounding those new choices, those new behaviors. And guess what? It probably will not take you as long. The human body is an amazing adaptation machine. It probably will not take you as long to navigate out of where you are than it took to get you where you are. So I think it's really cool to look at it from that perspective. I try to use it as a bit of self-prioritization and empowerment, but also taking ownership and responsibility of where you are. And even if there are other things that were at play, having that attitude is going to make it so much easier for you, rather than pointing the finger at something else that's going on. And then work with a coach, work with a medical professional who understands what they're doing related to hormones or gut health or whatever you are struggling with. And those two things together 100%, ownership and accountability combined with a really intelligent program and a great strategy, that's going to supercharge your results.
Yes, and you hit the nail on the head there. So like coaches understanding physiology is being able to. You mentioned the thyroid, brittle nails, body temperature, digestive motility. There are other signs and symptoms. I always think of it like a race car going around a track, right? It doesn't just come to an immediate halt. You will see a gradual, as petrol starts to run out, you'll see a gradual slowdown, a gradual decline. You'd have a splutter along the way, and when coaches can see that, that's how they identify which of the 10 people have been overeating, which of the 10 people have been chronically undereating. Right. Looking at history, looking at signs, looking at symptoms, that's when they go, right, this is the strategy that's going to work with that individual.
And I think that starts what coaches rush. They rush the intake, like they're excited to sign a client. They're excited to close a new person. They rush the intake. They rush the questionnaires. They rush the process of getting to know the client. And they try to spit out a program. And there needs to be a little bit more well-calculated strategy and reflection. And there's a learning period. I'm all for delivering a quick turnaround as promised. If your client submits some information to you, by all means, respond to your client. But I think we've lost the ability to kind of not only balance this future pacing of the coaching relationship, but pausing and asking really good follow-up questions, right? So if you get an intake form back and you have 0 follow-up questions, that's a problem. Unless your client literally gave you a book on their entire life, I would say more often than not, even for a healthy client, 8 out of 10 times, I'm probably going to have if not a follow-up, a clarification, a clarifying question, maybe some reflective listening. Hey, it sounds like you're experiencing this. Is that how you feel? Right? There should be dialogue. It should not just be, hey coach, I submitted my homework and now you just spit something out and you're instantly there. Same thing for check-ins, right? Check-ins should not just be ping pong of, hey coach, I submitted my check-in. Cool. Subtract 10 carbs and go do more 15 minutes of cardio. It needs to be a little bit more than that. And I think if you can incorporate into that into your service, it's really helpful in order to not only retain clients longer, but also they feel cared for. And you'll probably feel more confident in your coaching capabilities and drive a better result and outcome as a result of the time you took to learn about the person that's in front of you. It's hard to do. You'll get more efficient with it after you've done it a couple times. The first time it's going to be like, wow, this is actually a lot. Like I was not going this in depth. Yeah. But after you do it a few times, you'll develop ways to do it efficiently. And that's also where coaching systems come into play. But I would encourage you, to ask those follow-ups, because that's how you figure out, okay, out of my 40 clients, who is just doing this at the surface level versus who's actually got some problems, who needs more TLC. You're never going to know unless you investigate. You have to be sort of this detective. My team and I kind of talk about it as like, when we're talking about these metabolic and hormonal challenges, it's like being a metabolic detective and looking underneath the hood, looking underneath the surface. You're never going to know that unless you have to do information gathering, or you're going to be clueless.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with this. So you mentioned earlier on with the 2 avatars of caloric surplus versus caloric deficit. Now, when it talks about health, longevity, people always talk about carbs and fats and red meat and plants. How much of an impact is the calories in versus calories out? Is this the thing that we should be looking at, not just from a body composition perspective, but an overall health perspective?
Yeah, it's still important. It's one of the key pillars of managing. Energy expenditure is kind of an inescapable. Now, I think some people do overplay energy expenditure as like the only thing that matters.
Yes, agreed.
But I do think accounting for how you are fueling your body from a basic, I think it's necessary to audit it from a basic perspective to first understand your intake. I think it's also incredibly important for athletes to make sure you're not underfueling from a performance perspective. And if you do have body composition goals, there is a level of portion control required. I don't think you can just say, I eat healthy and eat a jar of almond butter every day and still, achieve your fat loss goals. So we do need to be a miser of energy, but we're not going to. My philosophy is that it exists equally along with other key nutritional principles, whether that be eating single ingredient whole foods that are micronutrient dense, whether it would be accounting for stress and lifestyle, right? I put stress and lifestyle very high up on the conversation around metabolic health.
Me too.
But we're never going to ignore our nutritional intake but we have to understand that a broader conversation exists of both quality and quantity. And playing macro Tetris just to achieve a particular caloric number is not optimal, right? So just because, okay, my coach set me at 1450 calories or 1775, and I can get these Quest bars here, and I can have these chips over here, and I'm going to have this snack food here, and I can still fit in, my people who are having like Lucky Charms post workout. The idea of having that number should not be to gamify it to fit in as much crap food as possible. It should be, I have an understanding of what my body needs at a baseline, and then depending on how what goal I'm working towards achieving, I will steer that. That is your energy intake and availability should be your general compass. And when we're at a point where we're exceeding our energy intake, where it becomes a problem is when we have excess energy availability. The inability to pull that energy through the system is where people experience that phenomenon of insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome begins to impact us on a cellular level. We have both insulin resistance, oxidative stress, inflammation. The body fat begins to literally exude different chemical messages than muscle tissue, right? So muscle tissue is actually much more metabolically beneficial than body fat. It's not just what people say when they put this is a pound of fat and this is a pound of muscle. If you can't see me on video and you're listening on audio right now, think about a person who has like their palm out. It's not just a conversation of, oh, muscle burning calories. No, there's quite literally different chemical signals that come off of the tissue inside of your body, that really impact your overall health and longevity. I care way more about that, over the long haul. You do need to account for intake 100%, but it should be placed equally in a conversation across a spectrum of nutritional topics. It shouldn't be the only thing that we're looking at. But if you do need to get control of your body weight, if you do need to lose body fat, if you are trying to perform optimally or build muscle, you are going to need to steer your total energy intake to accommodate that goal that you have within a certain window, right? And so it's really less of a target and maybe more of like a window that you can look at in terms of a sliding scale of where we can shoot for that in order to move in the direction of our goals.
That makes a lot of sense. And I always use it as I haven't actually said this, I've said this once to an actual American, because most of my coaches I work with in my mentorship are from UK, Australia, other things. But I use an American football analogy. If you think of the coach like the hypothalamus, right? He's putting the game plan together. He speaks to pituitary, which is like his quarterback. And if his throwing arm's good and the game plan's good, and the wide receivers and halfbacks, which is like our hormones and our pancreas and wherever else are running well, we will win against much higher levels of opposition. Whereas if the hypothalamus is getting bombarded with the media, the pituitary's arms feeling a bit off, and the pancreas is running bad lines, this is where, like, yes, calories in versus calories out matters, but the actual BMR is lower. Someone's total daily energy expenditure is lower because our liver is 15 to 20% of our metabolism. Our gut has an impact on thyroid output. These things all become a bit of a rich tapestry. So I know we've got a couple of minutes left before we need to shoot off, and I want to go through a quick fire. And I appreciate all these could be a podcast in themselves, but a quick fire, 4 questions, some of the hot topics in the industry today around nutrition, and my closing question I ask everybody. So
I'll do my best to answer and shut up. That's not my strength. That's why I have solo episodes, but I'll do what I can.
And this is your game. You can take this as long as you need to, right? But I'm conscious of your schedule. So are supplements really just the top of the nutritional pyramid, or should coaches pay more attention to them?
Depends on the client. I do think it's more than the top of the pyramid. Some coaches pay too much attention to them. Some do not pay enough attention. So depending on your origins in the industry, some people have a bias, right? They're like personal trainers, or they're, bodybuilders, or maybe they come from the holistic health side of the equation. Some people overemphasize them. Some people underemphasize them. I think they are one of the toggles that we have to move a client forward in transformation. And I think in the years that follow, special attention to micronutrients and essential fatty acids based on the current state of our food and the prevalence of deficiency. As people become more metabolically unhealthy, overweight, they have increased risk for things like magnesium and vitamin D deficiency, other key nutrients that are essential for daily life. So I would say from a vitamin and mineral perspective, and I don't just mean a multivitamin, I mean a true nuanced understanding of client needs and how that may be reflected in their biofeedback, things like fatigue, training performance, dehydration, electrolytes, for example. So I would say in some ways underrated, not necessarily the very tippy top of the pyramid. I think there's some frills, like pre-workout, for example, probably going to fall lower on my list than like essential nutrients, right?
Okay.
So I think they're important. Some people, due to certain biases, may overemphasize them or push them, in that way. So I try to have a longer content piece on 8 evidence-based reasons for supplementation. I think the reason why you're supplementing with something matters. And on Instagram, where we have influencers and detox teas and pre-workouts, that category of supplements far, far overrated and is like the tippy top of what you need in terms of like least important top of the pyramid, not the bottom of the pyramid. But I think there's a core group of supplements that there's an increased need for due to deficiency risks in our population, which should be a part of the mainstream nutritional conversation in order to live an optimal, healthy life.
Love it. That's a perfect answer. Nothing to add there. Should people be scared of seed oils?
I think you should not go out of your way to eat them. And when possible, and preparing your meals at home, I would encourage you to use either a monounsaturated fat source, extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, maybe cook with coconut oil for high heats, or like a grass-fed butter. I wouldn't intentionally add seed oils because they're already in so many packaged multi-ingredient foods. And I would be mindful of your omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. So seed oils are going to be higher in omega-6. We've seen a drastic exponential increase in omega-6 to omega-3 ratio over the years. I think there's benefits to increasing DHA and EPA fatty acids for a myriad of conditions and health concerns. So that would be my take. Most people are already getting enough or a little extra on the seed oil polyunsaturated side because we've moved away from more of that single ingredient diet style. And we see pretty significant health benefits from more of that Mediterranean ratio of monounsaturates to saturates to poly, where poly are a little less prevalent. So it doesn't mean you can never eat a seed oil in your life. I don't think there are people online who fearmonger seed oils. We're going to stay away from that. We don't want to cause more stress to ourselves. However, increasing your intake of them is suboptimal, and I wouldn't recommend it. I personally try to be very intentional about consuming other health promoting fatty acids and keeping those in balance in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. You were singing from the same hymn sheet. I love that answer. You can see me smiling from ear to ear as you were going through that. Last quick fire one, and then we'll have our closing question. Is there a time and a place for the carnivore diet?
In a small selection of people, and for folks experiencing some pretty severe digestive distress from plant foods, I think for a short acute period of time, a animal-based protein focus. And I do think these individuals can incorporate a bit of fruit as well for antioxidants, nutrients that can be sometimes easier on the digestive tract than cruciferous vegetables and certain plant foods. I'm not saying I'm against those. I'm just saying for certain people, a small subset of the population, animal-based plus a little bit of fruit for carbohydrate, and also to regulate SHBG in a male client base, which is a binding protein that impacts testosterone. I think it could be done. I think it shouldn't be viewed as a fad diet, but like a short-term intervention. And for people with incredibly dysregulated hunger signals, if you're insulin resistant, sometimes going lower carbohydrate may help you regulate your hunger and cravings, improve that insulin sensitivity. And it's really about your personal preference and adherence. So if you enjoy that and you get adequate protein and we can get those other essential nutrients, I think it can be helpful for a period of time. It would not be my recommended like permanent only diet style that you follow. But speaking from personal experience, when I've had times in my life with digestive distress or a hard time in other components of my health, simplifying things, going to those single ingredient foods, building it around lean animal proteins, and incorporating certain nutrients from fruit, that was very helpful for me. But I wouldn't say I'm a big proponent of the majority of people doing the quote unquote carnivore diet as it exists on Instagram.
I couldn't agree more. So there's always one question I ask every guest as we get to the end of the show. And that is, what is one thing you've changed your mind on?
Moment. I'm changing cameras so we don't kill the battery here, my friend.
No worries.
So let's see. A couple things I've changed my mind on. You know, when you're in the industry for a long time, there's a lot of stuff you change your mind on.
Cool, good answer in itself.
So I think I used to put a little bit more weight into certain training styles. I think I've come full circle to appreciate foundational concepts like consistency and effort being key movers related to training. I think related to nutrition, something I have changed my mind on a bit was, you know, when you become more educated on different sort of quote unquote natural ways to restore and improve your health, I think there's a lot of people who swing on this spectrum, right? And they maybe like overemphasize plant foods for things like gut health. And because there's great data around fiber, I think I have changed my tune on that a little bit. So from a nutritional perspective, I think I've broadened my stance a bit on certain things from a gut health intervention perspective. I think from a training perspective, I've simplified things to understand that effort, consistency, intensity, and enjoying your training are very important. I think I've also changed my mind on the length or necessary duration of a training session to have a stimulus for. Now, granted, I've been training for a long time, so I can preserve muscle on a little bit less volume than what it took to build that muscle. But I've been surprised in a few years where I've had to really devote a lot of time to my business that I've actually been able to maintain a decent amount of strength and decent body composition, even with what most would consider less than optimal training stimulus. I'm really trying to give you a little bit better one on nutrition or supplementation or something along those lines. There's just so many things you kind of, I'd say I've been a slight evolution in overall stance on things.
I think whilst you're thinking of this, I think that in itself is a really good answer. I think I added that question to the show because everyone sees, we've been very fortunate to have some very big name guests in the industry, and people look at these people and they might look at your Instagram as, these guys have got it figured out. Like, you know, it looks all polished, it looks all good. And like, and I want, there's a phrase like this, is idiots all the way up. And that's not to call you an idiot or myself an idiot, but it's like, we're all just working this out. We're all just figuring this out. And sometimes just remembering, look, we were wrong about stuff. We changed our mind about stuff. And the person listening to this could easily, if they've looked up to you and what you do, could easily follow in your footsteps if they make the right choices. And I think the fact you said there's a lot you've changed your mind on answers that question perfect.
I think I've got it more fine-tuned because truthfully, I was very fortunate that I was exposed to a lot of different ideas early on where my general principles and frameworks have actually held pretty tight. I've been pleasantly surprised. I would say like 85% of my approach has, regardless of research or opinion in the industry, has actually held pretty tight, which I feel pretty good about because when you're teaching people, you always want to make sure that you're doing so responsibly. So I would say it's less a particular topic. And maybe what I've actually changed my mind on the most now that I have a lot more adult responsibilities is I would say if you're a younger trainer listening to this and you have a client who's successful in another area of their life, but maybe their core competency is not fitness and they're not like shredded, I think just having a greater appreciation for what that person may be dealing with in their life and understanding getting in shape later in life after you've cemented certain habits is a challenge. I also view health and fitness as kind of a gateway to personal development and professional development and led to a lot of my career success. But there are individuals who achieve that career success because they took like a brute force approach to personal and professional development where they were just laser focused on their career for a period of time. And I see younger trainers sometimes almost look down or talk down on these clients because they're less fit or less healthy, or how could you not prioritize this? And they had a different goal in a different season of their life where they've created financial success, or maybe they built a family. And I would say if you're a younger trainer, you're missing an opportunity to, number one, learn from these clients because they're successful in another area of their life. Number two, understand that they took a different path and different journey. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're better than them because you got in shape when you're 18 years old, when you had no responsibilities, you were only in school and you could just eat protein and go to the gym. So I think that's one thing I wish earlier on. I mean, I was fortunate to work with some really pretty cool people and I definitely learned a lot, but I think being asking more questions, learning a little bit more about their journey, learning from your clients. A lot of these people are experts in their own way. And so what I've changed my mind on the most probably is like leveraging that in client transformation, really understanding the individual. I think I've changed my mind to where I've always been a people person, but I very much put like the person over the program, or the person over the protocol, the person over the product, like the supplement or whatever. So I'm standing pretty firm in that now, but I think I have a greater nuance and appreciation and understanding for what that truly means. And so I'd say more than anything, it's not training program design. It's not periodization. It's not that, supplement research and opinions have changed. It's not that I, recant something that I wrote in my book that I wish I stated differently. It's actually more in regards to client interaction, appreciation, and understanding. And if you're a younger coach, respecting those clients, even if they're not necessarily someone who walks in that has all their shit figured out. And if they got it wrong initially, just having some patience and understanding, and actually being a student and treating it as a learning opportunity, because a lot of these people could probably help you out a lot in your life if you listen and you treat it as an opportunity to gain some wisdom. So that would be probably the biggest thing. And something once you lose that opportunity, it's gone. And you may only be with someone for a period of time in their life. So have an appreciation for that season and use it to make you a better person, a better coach. And by learning about them, it'll also enable you to design better programs too.
I love that answer. There's a guy called Joe Dunworth. There's a very successful online group coaching product. And he always says, it could be worse. I could have had a real job. And I'm not saying that PT is an incredibly hard job, but like we have people that are accountants and lawyers and doctors and these brutal careers. And I'm like, if you put me in an accountancy firm, I would not know what I'm doing. Why do you assume that someone knows it when they come into your world? Just because you have. So I've really enjoyed this chat. I think we could have gone for much longer, which is always good. And we didn't get half of the questions, but you gave me better answers than I would even expecting. So for anyone that wants to learn more, wants to dive deeper into your work, and I can definitely vouch for the fact that it's excellent, where do people find Sam?
So I am Sam Miller Science on just about every social platform, which includes spend a good amount of time on Instagram. I have a podcast, Sam Miller Science. Most of these things are linked on my website, sammillerscience.com. And if you are someone who's more in your own health and fitness journey, my book is probably going to be the most digestible thing for you. It's written in a less advanced way to apply to both the consumer and the health and fitness coach. And that's called Metabolism Made Simple, Making Sense of Nutrition to Transform Metabolic Health. And that's linked on my website, sammillerscience.com. As far as for health, fitness, nutrition professionals, aside from my free content, I do have a nutrition and metabolism specialization program. You can learn more about that at metabolismschool.com. It's pretty much the only program in the industry that's a combination of live mentorship accredited by 5+ organizations. You get access to multiple instructors. We do live Zoom calls every week. We've worked with coaches from around the globe, hundreds, if not thousands at this point. And there's probably some other important stuff that I'm forgetting to mention, but actual real world case studies to learn and kind of hone your craft, and something that actually allows coaches to learn more about my physiology tweet that I shared, right? So I'm a big fan of teaching it because I think it makes you a better coach. And we also do a lot more of kind of like in the trenches work with people versus just a lot of people throw you in like a do-it-yourself curriculum and you're just watching videos or reading on your own. That's not really our style. So if you want to learn more about that, that's metabolismschool.com. But I always encourage people, I probably have more free stuff after doing this for over a decade than just about arguably probably almost anyone in the industry. So start with the free stuff. I'd love to give you that kind of virtual high five and handshake of adding some value to your life. And if you like the way I do things, check out some of the other products and maybe I can help you there too.
Awesome. I'm definitely on my way to catching you up with the free stuff for coaches, but I love the fact that you went into detail. And I think, despite us having very similar education products, I think there's always room for coaches to learn from various different perspectives. And I think there is huge value in what you do. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Of course, man. Appreciate it, Simon.